Jeffry, FRIEDEN, good afternoon. As a professor of government at Harvard University, what difference would you underline between France and USA regarding the role of states?
Well, in the long run, that is having to do with the role of the state in the economy, that France and the United States have many similarities, but also a few differences. In both France and the United States, to emphasize first the similarities, there is a broad agreement that the government should provide a social safety net, social insurance for the elderly, for health care, for those who are unemployed or disabled. So there is agreement on that. Although people tend to emphasize the differences between our countries, I would say that the vast majority of Americans would accept the need for a social insurance system run by the government. There's also agreement that the federal government, the national government in the United States, like the French government, should provide certain important public goods, highways, infrastructure, a public education system, national defense, things along those lines. And there is a general agreement that the government needs to carry out regulation of certain economic activities. Where there is a difference is that France has a much longer tradition of centralized state government, of a centralized state. The United States is a federal system, a very decentralized system. Many of the things that are provided in France by the central government in Paris are provided in the US by state or local governments. To take the most striking example, perhaps, that always surprises my French friends, education, that is primary and secondary education in the United States, is entirely financed and provided at the local level in towns, villages, and cities. It is not controlled by the federal government, although it is regulated by the federal government, and it is hardly financed at all by the federal government. So we have a more decentralized system, a federal system, and that is the principal difference between the United States and France.
Regarding the current worldwide economic crisis, what option does the state actually have?
I think in terms of the current crisis, I think there are a number of important things to recognize. The first important thing to recognize is that as we have all understood now, this is not a normal cyclical recession. If this had been a normal cyclical recession, we would have recovered substantially by now. In the normal recessions that we've experienced over the past 75 years, whether in Europe or in North America, at this point, 4 or 5 years after the crisis begins, we would have had 20%, the economy would be 20% bigger than it was at the beginning of the crisis. Unemployment would be way below where it was, but it's not. And that's because we are in the midst of a worldwide series of debt crises. Debt crises such as we've come to know in Brazil or Turkey or Russia or other poor countries. And now it's the time of the United States and the United Kingdom and peripheral Europe to experience a real debt crisis. And a debt crisis is different. It's different from a normal recession, and it has different requirements. The requirements that we all face, whether in Europe or North America, really are crucial. And it is especially crucial to understand that they come in phases. We say in the United States, timing is everything. There are short-term, medium-term, and long-term imperatives. The short-term imperative, and people both in the United States and in Europe tend to confuse those things. In the short run, the most important thing is to make the recovery take hold, that is to get the economy growing again. That means that we need stimulative monetary and fiscal policy. It also means that we need to deal directly with the debt burden, that is the accumulation of debt that is slowing down the recovery. The principal problem that we face today is that this accumulation of debt, this debt overhang, surendettement, as I've learned to say, has constrained both lending and spending. And as a result, economies are not recovering. So the first problem that we face is dealing in the short run with the recovery. We need stimulative monetary policy, we need stimulative fiscal policy, and we need a restructuring of debts, both household and sovereign. But then there are medium-term problems that both North America and Europe face. Both North America and Europe face a serious fiscal problem in the medium run, largely due to the fact that our people, for a variety of reasons, have been unwilling to tax themselves to pay for the programs that they want. We have a demand for programs like healthcare, like education, like old age insurance, but an unwillingness to pay the taxes to finance them. We have to deal with that medium-term fiscal problem. Then in the long run, we have a problem of long-term economic growth and productivity. And I think everyone recognizes that our advanced industrial economies need substantial investments in education, in infrastructure, in research and development, that we will not be able to move forward in the long run without increasing our ability to produce and to compete. So there is a very serious and difficult agenda. But I think we need to separate the short, medium, and long term. In the short run, recovery is the imperative. In the medium run, dealing with our fiscal problems so that we pay for what we want, right, is imperative. In the long run, restoring the productivity and competitiveness of our economies are imperative.
Do you think the private organization have replaced the role of the state?
No, I think that it is widely recognized that there are things that private institutions, private organizations cannot do. Even in the day of Adam Smith, even the classical and neoclassical economists recognize that there is a role for government, that there are certain public goods that will not be supplied in adequate quantity by the private sector. Now we can argue about how extensive those public goods are, how they should be financed, who should benefit from them most or least. Those are legitimate arguments. But I don't think anyone would argue that there's no role for regulation, no role for a central bank, no role for a social safety net. I think that the consensus exists, and this is often lost sight of. If you compare where we are today with where our societies were 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, today there is a very broad consensus in favor of the delivery of a very substantial range of public goods, social insurance policies, regulatory policies that modern states have to deliver. A modern economy requires a modern state, and a modern state must be involved in many aspects, whether it's infrastructure, regulation, or other things. Right? So I think that there's no question that the private sector cannot, in fact, provide everything that a modern economy needs.
Jeffry, FRIEDEN, thank you very much.
Thank you.